Welcome to the show. A few days ago, I did a review on this really cheap survival knife that I bought from Harbor Freight. I'll have a link to that review if you're interested. Anyway, it cost about $8, and as you might imagine, it's pretty cheaply made. Fit and finish was not great. Definitely not my type of knife. It was one of these survival knives that has a hollow handle, so obviously it doesn't have a full tang and so on. But anyway, when I got done with that review, I took the thing apart and I started thinking about what I could do with it. Make a full tang knife out of it or make a spear or something. Well, I decided that spear was probably the way to go. And a few days later, my son was working out in the garden and he broke this garden hoe, which revealed that the handle was cracked pretty badly at the end. Now, the handle is a little bit short. I think it's about 4, maybe 4.5 feet long. But I figured it would be fine to experiment with anyway, and a 4 or 5 foot spear isn't bad. So I took a look at it, kind of figured out where the cracks were and where they ended, and went and cut it off on the scroll saw. So once I was done with that and kind of inspected it and made sure that there were no cracks, I brought it over to the belt sander because I wanted to kind of smooth out the ends and give it maybe a certain cosmetic look. In hindsight, I'd probably do it differently because I ground it down kind of far and it actually got pretty weak, which made it kind of challenging to fasten the blade in there in such a way that it would really be a strong blade, and I'm still not really satisfied with it. So with that done, I tried a few different ways to cut a groove into the end of this that I could fit the knife into. I don't know if it's just me, but I have a really tough time using a scroll saw to cut a real straight groove. So I did the best I could with that, and then I figured I'd maybe clean it up with some sandpaper, so I tried that, but that didn't really give me, it didn't give me a nice flat groove. So next I tried a miter saw, which worked okay, but it still didn't give me like a real clean, neat groove that was the right dimension. So after trying that for a bit, I decided to take a cutting disc on the grinder, and that actually worked really well, but I ran into some trouble because the wheel on there is only, I think it's a 4.5-inch diameter. And so with the hub in the middle, that maybe only gives you like 1.5 inches of depth. But it opened things up enough that I could get a nice rectangular metal file in there. And of course, a metal file doesn't move wood very quickly, but it did give me a much more precise and clean cut. And it also happened to be the same thickness as the tang of the knife, so that actually worked pretty well. This blade had kind of a Bowie knife profile to it. And I thought I should go more for the symmetrical spear point look. So I used the same cutting disc and roughed out the profile that I wanted. And then brought that over to the belt sander and spent some time cleaning it up and really getting that profile to look nice, look the way I wanted it to. Now, of course, this knife will only be sharp on the one edge, but I thought I'd give it kind of a little bit of a false edge look, at least right out by the point. So I spent some time working on that, and of course the existing bevel on the knife blade creates some trouble right out there at the end because it really curves back and meets the sort of the spine of the knife. But I worked on it until I had something that at least looked good to me. And then I cleaned that up with a finer grit on the belt sander, and then went in and kind of finished it out by hand with an even finer grit sandpaper. So when it came time to fasten the blade to the shaft of the spear, I thought about drilling holes and running pins through the way you would do scales on a knife. I even thought about heating it up and drawing out the tang and doing like a hidden tang style. But in the end, I decided I wasn't too sure about the strength of the shaft of the spear, and especially where it joined to the blade. So I figured I'd run a pair of stainless steel bolts through. And that way, if something happened, if the shaft cracked or if things didn't get seated right, it would be pretty easy to pull that blade out and create a new shaft for the spear. During the process of trying to drill holes in the blade, I learned that this is really a very hard steel. I don't know for sure what type of steel it is because it just said stainless steel on the packaging, and I could guess 440 or something, but who knows? It came from China. At any rate, it was a very hard steel. I tried a few different things to sort of pre-drill a hole and then come in and try to drill where I had pre-drilled or at least pre-drilled a divot. But in the end, I decided the best thing to do would be just to take the torch, heat up the blade, and temper the steel way back. Now, I could have fired up the forge and gotten this done probably a little quicker, but I figured the propane torch is probably a little more precise. I can really just aim at the part of the tang that I want to get and not really ruin the temper on the rest of the blade. And as I suspected, the drilling went a lot faster once the blade was tempered like that. And in fact, you can see I'm drilling on it while it's hot, but actually it went through so easily that the bit didn't even really overheat. Once I had that first bolt in place, I made sure that everything was more or less in alignment, and then I drilled the second hole. And of course, this time everything went a lot easier because that heat had really softened up the steel. So right about the time I finished this up, my son came in to see what I was doing. And I can tell you he was pretty happy to find his dad making a spear. So we had a little fun with him kind of posing with the spear, which is just about the perfect size for him. But there were still a couple things I had left to do. I needed to countersink the bolts so that I could get them properly seated in there. And unfortunately, a little bit of wood chipped out on one of the holes as I was doing that. But then I got everything fitted up and tightened down, and the blade was in there pretty snug. So I looked at it after I had them all together, and I could see that there was what appeared to be a little crack coming from where that front screw was. But overall, I felt like it had come out pretty well. For a future project, I might decide to take this apart and kind of redo that joint. For one thing, I think I'd leave a lot more of the handle material, and I wouldn't bevel it down quite so far. And then kind of stepping back and taking a look at it, I realized that the whole thing was very bright. So I decided I would fix that by taking the torch and tempering the rest of the blade down to the same color as that tang area. And I knew at that point it wouldn't hold an edge as well, but this project was mostly just for fun, and it's not going to be used as a weapon. It's just going to be something I hang on the wall or shoot a little fun video with or something. A couple of things I learned from this project. One is definitely if you're going to join a spear point to a shaft in the way that I did it, you want to have as much thickness in that hardwood shaft as you can. And I do like this way of using bolts rather than pins, because if something goes wrong, it's a lot easier to unscrew those bolts and take the thing out of there. But on the other hand, throwing some epoxy in there would have definitely given me a more rigid lockup and probably added a little strength to that joint too. So on a future project, I think I'd probably reevaluate the whole design. But this definitely was a fun project and something that I've been wanting to try for a long time. So I hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, throw me a like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you in the next video.